A question I get a lot is how much money can I actually make doing private money loans? So I actually started creating a note in my phone when I first started private lending because I remember my attorney telling me that I would need to claim that money on my taxes if I did it in my personal name, right? So let me pull up my notes and show you or tell you how much I made from my first few loans. Okay, so the first one, it was a loan to a contractor, and oh, why? I can't find it. I'm looking, but I know it's in here because I just looked at it. But it was a loan to a contractor, and um, he needed $10,000. And okay, here it is, October 4th, 2023. Okay, that's when I made the note. So he needed $10,000, and the expenses that I had associated with providing this loan were $50. That was my wire fee. And then the return, he would give me $14,000. So technically, I made $3,950 off of that loan. And that was just some weeks, that wasn't even a long time. On the second loan, actually, this was interesting. So, with the second private money loan I did, it actually was not a cash loan, it was actually a credit card loan. So, let me just tell you how this works. Basically, the contractor needed some supplies, and how contractors often get paid is through draws, right? So, they are being paid from a lender or from an insurance company or whoever, but they usually get paid at different segments of the project. So they typically have to furnish the materials themselves, or but also they have to pay their subcontractors to get to a certain place in the work so that they can request a draw. So for this particular contractor, he needed some materials to be purchased. And instead of using his cash, which he wanted to use to pay his subcontractors, he needed a loan to buy the materials. And so he gave me the option to actually just pay the invoice. And then when he would take the draw from the insurance company, he would pay me back the cash. Now, this was one of my favorite transactions because I have an Amex Platinum card, and the points are amazing. I love them. And I was like, okay, so I'm about to put all this money on this Amex card and pay it back in 60 days or whatever. But the interest for what I'm getting is, going to be minimal. And I think it was actually 30 days. This was a 30-day loan. So I was like, the interest is going to be minimal. And I get to get all these points, and it's just going to be great, right? So the amount that I ended up having to pay on my credit card, and mind you, I had the option to pay cash, I just chose to pay with my credit card. So I ended up paying the invoice. It was $12,302. And since this was a shorter term loan, I think it was only a month, like 30 days, I was paid $15,000. So let's do a quick calculation. And there's no wire fee involved in this one because I used a credit card, but there was a little bit of interest. Um, so let's start here. So 15,000 is what I was paid minus the $12,302. So I was standing to receive 26.98. So I'm gonna write that down. 26.98. So the expense though, and this is how I calculated this. I basically took my credit card interest rate, divided it by 12, and multiplied it by the amount that I put on the card. So here I have I had the credit card interest rate, which was 23.49%. And then I calculated that as 0.0643, some long numbers, percent interest per day. And so the number of days times that interest rate, and it ended up being like a few dollars. And I was like, okay, sounds good to me. So that was my second loan on a credit card. And then my next one was for $18,260.85. So on that one, that was another credit card loan actually. And the return, so he paid me back 25,000. So we're gonna do 25,000 minus 18, 260 and 85 cents. So that yields $6,739.15. Okay, so with that one though, it was a different interest rate. So that one I used my personal Amex card and I had a promotional interest rate for that period. It's amazing. So it was 6.99%. So, you know, my interest there was, okay, let me try to get this loan paid back before the promotional interest rate ends. So that was going to be a very small amount of cost as well. So for that one, I made over $6,000. So in terms of how much you can make when you're doing private lending, it honestly just depends on the transaction that you set up with your borrower. So I have never made less than 10%. And I don't know, I feel like if I'm gonna be making less than 10%, maybe I just put my money in the stock market, right? Like why even do this if I'm gonna make less than 10%? The most I've made was 40%. And I only made 40% one time. So it's not like a regular occurrence. But it was actually my very first loan where I made almost 40%. And that was the one where I made 3,950 because I had to subtract the wire fees. And I don't know, I thought the wire fee was 35, but my spreadsheet here says it was 50. So yeah, you can make, honestly, I would say at least 10% on your money. And some people even do shorter term loans, like just a few weeks. Like someone offered me, they were like, okay, I need $2,000 and I'm gonna pay you back $2,750. I was like, uh-huh, that that's interesting. That's almost 40%. I was like, well, they only needed the money for 3 weeks. And I was like, okay, that sounds like a good deal to me. So you can make at least 10%, but sometimes more. I have a lender, he typically pays 15%. I mean, sorry, a borrower, he typically pays 15%. And the way that we decide how much you earn is looking at the deal. So a lot of times if it's like a flipper who's doing the deal, they've already calculated their numbers to see what would work in terms of interest or whatever. And that's why they're not going to a hard money lender. That's why they're coming to you because they've decided, okay, this is how much I can afford to pay in interest if I want to get what I want to get out of this deal. And so a lot of it is like, you know, working with that person, not being greedy, but being like, okay, I still want to benefit from this. So 10% is my minimum. You can set whatever your minimum is. But if I can make 15% on the loan and it still benefits them and the deal still makes sense, then, you know, that works as well. So it really just depends on how you set it up. But honestly, the person with the gold makes the rules, and that's the golden rule. So if you were the one lending out the money, you can set the terms yourself. I mean, people may not always agree to your terms and may not want to lend from you, but you can set your own terms. So you'll decide how much you make. And another question I get is, what is the lowest amount that I can lend? I've never given a loan less than $2,000, but I've heard of wholesalers needing loans for $1,000. And those are usually short-term loans. So I would say if you have at least $1,000, you can get started in this private lending business and make at least 10% on your money. So something to think about. If you need help figuring out where to start, continue watching, reach out, and we'll see what we can do.